So let's talk about the San Antonio Spurs. The San Antonio Spurs are a team which has recently drafted Victor Wembanyama. And honestly, they have a pretty good lineup. I like what they have. But a lot of people aren't going to be tuning into Spurs games next season. And that's mostly just due to the fact that they're not a team which has consistently been great. They have been great consistently once, and it was during the era of Tim Duncan, right, and David Robinson, and all of that came with Tim Duncan, and that dynasty which they formed. It started with David Robinson, then Tim Duncan came around. The Spurs won 5 championships as a team through like 20 years in Tim Duncan's career. And then finally, he retired in 2016, and it seemed like Kawhi Leonard was going to take the next step into greatness for the Spurs, right? They had started with David Robinson, Tim Duncan came around, and the legacy was going to be passed on to Kawhi Leonard. That didn't end up happening as perfect as they would have hoped because the Spurs organization messed up. Instead of letting Kawhi rehab his injury, and instead of actually getting him real doctors, they were more focused on winning. So they just told him to play through the injury and that he would be fine. This caused him to basically be like, yo, I don't want to be here anymore because he got into a really big dispute against the organization about his injury. So it caused him to leave. And ever since Kawhi Leonard left, the organization has been trash. And I'm saying this in the most respectable way possible. But they've had Gregg Popovich, probably the greatest coach of all time, if we're being honest. And they've had him and basically DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge to like try to make it work, heal the wound, and try to do something, and that hasn't worked. Recently, they finally decided, you know what, we're going to rebuild. They decided it pretty perfectly. I think that you have to give them props as a great franchise because of how amazing the time to rebuild is. You know, you're getting a time right now where there's a lot of young stars out. You could actually, see what's happening with the NBA, and you don't have to be completely in poverty to rebuild correctly. And we've seen this throughout the years, right? Like where you don't have to starve your franchise like the Philadelphia 76ers did just to have a good pick, you know? And the Spurs are interesting. They have guys like Jeremy Sohan. They have guys like Keldon Johnson. They have a bunch of guys. They even, well, they have guys like Trey Jones, and they've really got to maximize the potential of their roster by just waiting for Wembanyama. You know, they have Devin Vassell, which is a pure scorer. And they have a bunch of guys who just can score, can play, and who can actually, play the game of basketball correctly and be effective on a good lineup, right? They don't just have to play into a system. They don't have to, be the best player on a team. All of these guys have just consistently waited for players and the Spurs to figure it out. And now they're going to see the results of what their rebuild has paid off for them. Let's face it, Victor Wembanyama is probably a generational prospect. And the reason why I'm saying probably is because we haven't seen him in the NBA yet. And I don't like how all of these people are, waiting and saying already that he's already a top player in the NBA. Like, he holds a lot of trade value, and that I will say, right? Because he is one of the most valuable players which we've seen. He's good, he's young, He's a complete anomaly, and he's a first overall pick who hasn't played a game yet and looked good in summer league. So for right now, we could say that he holds a lot of trade value, but acting as if he's like a superstar player already, in my opinion, is insane, right? And so when we see the San Antonio Spurs, we have to wonder, how long is Gregg Popovich going to stay in this franchise? This is not to hate on the Spurs or anything, but it's like Gregg Popovich is old, and people are talking about him like he's going to dedicate his entire career, right, or the rest of his life basically, to coaching Victor Wembanyama. We all know that he's going to stay for longer just to coach Wemby, and he's probably going to always be at least some type of present, right, when it comes to the Spurs organization, because he loves them and they love him. And even though, yes, he will coach for 3 or 4 more years, how much time can Gregg Popovich stay in the Spurs, you know, without him retiring or wanting to be home? I understand that he's a very militant guy. He comes from being a military guy, so I understand that he probably loves his job and that he probably gets very happy from just doing it. But is this sustainable? Is my real question, right? And the reason why I say all of this is because you need Gregg Popovich if you have Victor Wembanyama. So if you don't know if Gregg Popovich is going to retire, it causes a huge problem for the Spurs, where it's like Gregg Popovich needs to show Wembanyama Spurs culture. He needs to instill a new wave of players and a supporting cast and a winning formula with the new team, which works in the modern day system. And the reason why I say this is because without Gregg Popovich, Victor Wembanyama's growth is stunt, right? Yes, you could be a great player, but a big reason why people were so excited about him going to the Spurs was because he is so good, and learning from that Spurs culture would benefit Victor Wembanyama so much that he could become one of the greatest players of all time, right? I'm sorry, but not every player is LeBron James. You know, the same LeBron James which learned by himself, which had like 16 different coaches, which has had a complete turnaround between players in his NBA career, between players he played with and systems. He didn't learn from one person, right? It isn't like, you know, like Michael Jordan, who learned from Phil Jackson, and him and Scotty managed to learn together, so it eased the wound. Or it isn't like a Kobe, who also learned from Phil Jackson and had Shaq to help him will him into winning that first few times. We're talking about a guy who's gonna come into the NBA, and everyone needs at least one person to at least win with, right? You don't want to leave a young player out with any coach. You don't want to make him have to figure it out on his own, because that's just bad organization of a franchise, right? Like Tim Duncan didn't figure it out on his own. When he came into the NBA, he had another superstar, which was literally another big man, which made him be able to realize how to play as a big man in the league, play defense, play offense. Even it doesn't matter how good you are, how high of a draft pick you are, and what you have. Everybody needs somebody to teach them how to play in the NBA. Not necessarily how to win, but just how to play, just how to get it done in both ends, and just how to turn those empty stats, which a lot of players have, into playoff and regular season wins, you know? It's like Michael Jordan when Phil came in, where those regular season wins finally turned, no, where those regular season stats turned into playoff wins and getting to the finals, as he had never even, I think, gone past the second round. It's like, you know, it's like Kobe, right? Where those original that shot chucking originally got turned into playoff wins that later. right? And so with Victor, we have Pop to show him. And that's why it's important for Pop to be there and Pop to be present in his development. I like the Spurs for next season. I don't know if they're going to be good right away, but I know that they're definitely going to be interesting and that we're going to have to be looking at them and taking a look out for them. So, yeah, let's see what happens.